hi to everybody who is just joining me with the recording. This presentation is going to be delivered via Google Slides presentation, which I can share, and we do have the recording that we're doing now. As we go, I'm going to ask you if you'll keep your microphones muted. That'll keep us from having some unnecessary background noise. If you have somebody walk into the room or people join you late, what's going to happen if your microphone picks up noise, it's going to put your image biggest on the screen and kind of interject in the presentation. So if you could keep your microphones muted, that'd be great. As we go, if you'll post questions in the chat function, if you'll put your cursor towards the bottom of the screen, you should see a little kind of discussion bubble, and underneath it, it'll say chat. If you'll put questions in the chat, I'm hoping that we'll have time at the end of this for Q&A. If not, then the plan is going to be that I will kind of go through those chat questions, organize those questions, and do kind of a frequently asked questions video that we'll share out later on today. So as questions come up, just make sure that you put those in the chat. So for now, I'm going to share my screen with all of you so that you can see, hopefully, my presentation instead of my face. Let's see. There we are. Okay. All right, so let's get started. We're going to talk about some techniques for online instruction for honors education today. I'm going to try and go through these thoroughly, but also fairly quickly. So let me know. Let's see, I think you can minimize the images on the side of the screen. If you hover over the kind of panel of talking heads, there should be at the very top, there's a little, there are options that you can choose, and one of them is going to minimize those screens so you don't have to look at everybody's face. All right, so first things first, when we're thinking about what we're trying to do here, if you've been following any of the stuff that Chronicle of Higher Education has been putting out, that Inside Higher Ed has been putting out, that people have been posting about what we're doing right now in this really weird and unprecedented time, is that we are not necessarily teaching all of our classes online. That communicates a kind of ideal situation. What we're really doing is teaching remotely, and we're doing it in a time of emergency. And so we want to make sure everything is simple, that it's manageable, that it's stuff that we can understand without driving ourselves crazy, but also stuff that the students can understand without driving themselves crazy. And so when we're trying to decide how we maintain the rigor and dynamic nature of honors, think about what those core things are that we're trying to accomplish in an honors class. If your program is like mine, you might have pillars of honors courses that you are trying to make sure that you are accomplishing throughout the program. So we focus on leadership and deep research and service and presentation skill. But when we're thinking about what actually makes honors, those core principles tend to be things like discussion-based classes, student-driven discussions, and community-focused projects or community-focused classes, community-focused programs. We want to build a sense of community among our students. And so we want to make sure that those core things are things that we're not sacrificing when we're taking honors classes to remote education. So there are opportunities and threats here. So I think it's probably pretty easy to pick up on what those threats are going to be. There's no week one buffer for the students to learn the technology. They don't have an opportunity at the beginning to kind of say, well, I don't know how to load something in a Dropbox, or I don't know how to use a discussion board. We're kind of hitting the ground running here. And so that can be a little problematic. And, the students are frustrated and they're scared, and honor students as well as I do. I don't always trust them to ask questions when they're confused or lost, because sometimes they will imagine that asking questions shows weakness. And so we want to keep in mind those threats to our really dynamic and rigorous work that we do in honors classes. But there are some real opportunities to what we're having to do here. Students can continue to learn. They can continue to have connection by virtue of us having these classes moved online. A lot of our students, depending on where you are in the nation and how intense the reaction in your area is to this pandemic, students might be doing the social distancing thing. They might be in quarantine. And so that lack of connection among other students and faculty, that can be pretty challenging. And we should keep our eyes towards that, particularly knowing the mental health challenges that we often encounter in honors education. But if we do this well, we can help students continue to have that sense of connection with each other. And this may be a chance to explore how your class impacts the community around you, right? So depending on what kind of class you teach and what kind of opportunities you have, there may be opportunities for reflection on things like privilege and things like access to internet, access to food, right? So if any of your students are in areas where you have a high population of families who depend on public school for breakfast and lunch for their primary and secondary age students, that might be an interesting thing to think about if that lends itself well to the content of your course. And so we always want to kind of asset lens what we're going through, right? So if this is an opportunity to get your students to think about the challenges that are facing the world right now, that's part of what we should be doing in honors. So I saw on one of the Instagram posts that we had some people asking about synchronous and asynchronous models. So I think synchronous models are probably fairly easy to imagine. The asynchronous maybe not so easy, but I do want to cover synchronous models really fast, just so that it's there. But then remember, or keep in mind, I am going to be going on to asynchronous models as well, because that might be more useful for some of our students, particularly in more rural areas. So one of the first things that probably comes to mind when we're thinking about what we could do here is video lecturing and video discussion. So there are going to be some real pros and cons here. Pros is that, your students can still see you giving your lecture. They can see your energy. They can see your excitement. They can see your PowerPoint slides if that's what you're using, or Google Slides or whatever. You can share your screen with them if you're using things like Zoom or WebEx, or I think even Skype has screen sharing now. And so you can share your screen and demonstrate for them what you're wanting them to do. So if you're needing to show them how to access a discussion board or something like that, you can still do that with video lecturing. And if you're doing a synchronous model, that means that all students are signed in at the same time, right? Maybe you schedule it during your regularly scheduled class time. And they can kind of raise their hand in class. They can ask a question in the chat like y'all are doing now. You can kind of interact with them just like you would in a classroom, except you're not all together spreading all kinds of germs. Now, there are cons, obviously. If you're in a rural area, like most of the service area of Cleveland State is, you're likely going to have some students who do not have access to the internet. Now, we did see this week or last week that Spectrum and Comcast are making internet available to people in certain demographics in certain areas for 60 days free of charge. That has been widely posted on social media. You could probably Google Comcast Spectrum free internet and find information about it. And so I would, encourage you to get that out to your students if you can. But if you're in a situation like Cleveland State is, a lot of our service area just doesn't have the infrastructure for online instruction or for online connection. And so money aside, some of our students just don't have access to internet at home. So keep that in mind. You don't want to build a class that is completely dependent on everyone signing in at the exact same time, because access might not be available to everybody. And you also want to keep in mind that you might have students who live at home, whose brothers and sisters are not at school right now, and so there are a lot of distractions around. Or you might have students who are parents and are having to kind of homeschool their children these days. So you want to keep all of those things in mind. If you think you can make synchronous video lecturing and discussion work, go for it. But I would encourage you to be cognizant of the fact that some students just might not be able to participate. There might not be a perfect situation. From there, you want to make sure you're picking the right platform, right? So how interactive can your students be during lecture? If you want them to be interactive, then you want to pick a platform that allows for that. You want to make sure that if you are planning to record sessions, that your platform would allow for that. And if you're going to be posting those recorded sessions to your learning management system, chances are they still need to be accessible. We are in a reactive moment right now, and we are in a moment of apparent crisis in a lot of cases. But accessibility for your students with vision and hearing impairments is still going to be important. Just being a decent instructor, it's important for that reason, but it's also important for legal purposes as well. So make sure that you're able to make those accessible. And I can go into a little bit more detail about that later if there's time. And then the last point that's on this slide, I'll just say one more time, make sure that you're willing to make accommodations, or that you're able to make accommodations for students who cannot join the lecture or discussion during the scheduled time. And again, that's if you're doing synchronous discussion, where you're asking for everybody to sign in at the same time. Okay, so video conferencing, I think, is another option that you can do. Now, the difference that the way I'm using this language, video conferencing, I'm just imagining being individual meetings or small groups with your students, right? Another marker of honors classes is that the classes tend to be smaller, and so this is maybe more feasible in the honors community than it is more widely. There are pros and cons here too, right? You want to keep in mind that, again, there are just students who are not going to be able to engage in this, and so you maybe want to offer them email as an option or text messaging as an option. But there are some serious pros if you think you can make it work. So you could maybe do individual meetings with students or do small group meetings with students. And then you can think about how you can turn this into kind of a community building thing, right? So maybe if there's a recorded lecture that you do ahead of time, that you're not asking people to sign in and be present for, you're just kind of doing this lecture and delivering it, you can post that and then schedule times afterwards to meet with small groups of students and say, okay, so these were the main points. What questions did you have? These are the things that students generally have problems with. So make sure that you're kind of paying close attention here, or answer questions that they bring. You could require that they bring questions to those small groups. And be able to answer those questions for them. That way you're making the best use of the time, and you don't have a lot of like, okay, so what questions did y'all have? And then just kind of crickets because they're having a hard time formulating some questions. And then, you could also just use this as an opportunity to ask your students how they're doing, right? While everybody's getting signed on and settled, this is a real opportunity for them to have some personal connection with you and with the other students in their class. And with honors classes being so community driven and being smaller and having more kind of one-on-one time with the instructor, these are likely classes that students are genuinely going to miss when they're kind of forced into this online learning environment. And so having these kind of small group or individual video conferencing sessions gives you a chance to have a little bit of small talk with your students and just kind of check in on them and do some kind of mental health pulse checking. So moving on to asynchronous models. Asynchronous meaning you kind of record the video or the lecture, put it out there, and students get to it when they're able to, whether that's at 2 in the morning when they've gotten all their kids to bed, or, you know, when they're done with their waiting job that is still operating. You want to doing this kind of asynchronously does allow them a little bit more flexibility. So again, you want to make sure you're picking the right platform. You've got Zoom, you've got WebEx, right? But you also just have video recording software on your smartphone or your laptop. So if those of you who have an iPhone or an Android, chances are you can just open the YouTube app. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about video hosting. Chances are you can just open the YouTube app in the account menu. You just open that up and you'll have the option right there on the home page to start a video. And you can just record yourself with your phone camera and load it into YouTube from there. And I'd play around with it. It's going to take a little bit of trial and error. But YouTube, hosting videos on YouTube is so much easier than it was when I first started teaching online. The options that it gives you, it just kind of walks you through. Do you want this to be searchable? Do you want this to be private? So do you want people to be able to just go on YouTube and type something in and accidentally find your video? Or do you want to make it private so that only people who have the link can watch it? That's usually what I do. I don't want a lot of random people I don't know listening to my crazy accent and my umming myself through a lecture. So I tend to make that private and only available to people with the link. But again, I'd recommend just playing around with it. Block off maybe an hour or two when you've got the time, and just practice, right? Figure out how YouTube works, figure out how it works on your phone, figure out how it works on the website, and just figure out which process is going to work best for you. Once you've got it figured out, I really don't think that this will be a huge undertaking for you. We do see that with instruction videos, student interest tends to drop off at 5 to 7 minutes. And so most videos you want to be pretty short anyway. And the process of getting them uploaded, getting them categorized as private or public, and even getting them captioned, which is one of the things that's required for accessibility, it just doesn't take that long. It does take figuring out the process, but it just doesn't take that long once you've invested the time in figuring it out. And the other good thing about YouTube is that any question that you have about how to make any of that work, you can likely just search in YouTube, how do I caption a video in YouTube? And you'll find a video that walks you through it. So use those resources to the best of your ability. So again, you want to keep those lectures short. We do see that student engagement drops off after 5 to 7 minutes. Now, some of us are going to need to give lectures that are a little longer than 5 to 7 minutes. If you can break those up maybe into main points and load several videos that students can watch in pieces as they digest the information you're getting across to them, that might be better than just a solid 20-minute video that they have to watch. But, you know, I think there is value in telling students, you know, I'm sorry, this is a 20-minute video, but this is the lecture that you need to watch. Don't hesitate to pause it and stretch. Don't hesitate to pause it and go get a snack or go get some water and come back and dig back in. I'd also stress to students the fact that they can pause and take notes, and that is a real asset. And it's, in some cases, for some students, better than sitting in the classroom and not feeling like it's in the best interest of the entire class for them to say, okay, hold on, I didn't catch that last part. So again, as you're talking to students, try to asset lens as much as you can. Now, you know from teaching these classes for however many years that you've been doing it, the students do tend to have a harder time with different pieces of an assignment. That does tend to be consistent from semester to semester. So maybe these videos, you could just focus on the harder things that, you know, the things that they have a harder time with. And then ask students for input, right? You're probably assigning readings. Ask them what lectures they need, right? What are they having a hard time with? What are they just not getting? And then you can probably, based on what they need, hammer out a 5 to 7 minute video that answers the questions that they have, rather than feeling like you've got to hit every single thing in video form. If they have reading assignments, that might be the primary way that you're getting information across. Video is just secondary and supplemental. Now, another idea, if you are comfortable with this and you feel maybe a little bit more advanced in online education, you could maybe set up an assignment where you have students record instruction and post it for the class to review or comment on. I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody about something like that. I've done those projects before in online honors education. It tends to go pretty well. This may or may not be a great time to take it on, but if it's something that you want to try out, I'd be happy to talk with you about it. My email address has been shared pretty widely, so be happy to talk with y'all about that. Now, when it comes to these asynchronous supplemental video lectures, these asynchronous video lectures, you probably want to supplement those with some kind of discussion. I've got 3 examples here. Discussion boards are probably the one that we feel most comfortable with. Chat groups are another option. I use things like GroupMe and WhatsApp and Remind 101 with my groups all the time. And so what I'm planning on doing in my honors groups is kind of getting some focus on those chat groups and saying, you've got your online instruction. If you need anything, you can chat with me and with the other students in the class. It does operate just like text messaging. It moves pretty fast. It is pretty asynchronous. Students can jump in when they're able. And then the last one is going to be team-based essays and reflections, which might be a little bit more advanced, but something that we can talk about. So again, these chat groups, these are kind of synchronous, right? We've got these 3 options that I listed here, but there are probably more. You would have to have your students download the app, set up an account, and then you would add them to the group. It might allow you to see if your students are struggling with content or with the design of the course, because they do tend to talk with each other and ask each other questions. And so then you can kind of let them in the group discussion moderate each other. If anybody's giving information that's not correct, you can always jump in and be like, whoa, 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 okay, that's not exactly right. Let me get you going in the right direction here. But my experience with those chat groups has been overwhelmingly positive. A lot of times the students can answer each other's questions. I don't have to be on call 24/7, but I can monitor it and intervene if things are going in a weird direction. Now, the discussion boards, these do not have to follow the standard, you need to post once, that 250 words or more, and then you have to comment on at least 2 people's with 150 words or more. And you don't necessarily have to follow that standard. These are still honors classes after all. And in my experience, if you tell students kind of, these are the guidelines and expectations, these are the things I want to see out of you, but give them fewer rules, they'll do some pretty amazing things. So student-led topics and student design discussion boards have worked really well in our honors program. The majority of our classes are on ground, obviously, but we do have a handful of classes that we offer online, and we've got really good examples that I am happy to share of, student-led discussions, student-designed discussions, which I think are 2 different things, right? So a student designing the discussion would be the student coming up with the discussion questions, sending them to you, and you posting them in a discussion board for the rest of the class to interact with. A student-led discussion would be the student actually moderating a board, right? So they would take responsibility for leading that discussion. In most of these cases, I've found that instructor involvement is key, finding the balance between dominating the discussion as the professor and accidentally kind of falling off the face of the earth for the students. That's a hard balance to strike sometimes. And I've gone back and forth, right? In some of my honors classes, I've been really absent and just let them run things and only intervene when I absolutely have to. And in other classes, I've said, let's try this a different way. And I have, kind of tried to respond to every single person on every single board at least once. The overwhelming feedback I hear from students on that is that they like to see the discussion, see the professor active. It shows them that they're not alone, that they haven't been thrown into this, they haven't been thrown to the wolves in this. And you know, when we're thinking about this moment that we're in, where these students didn't sign up to do online classes, they signed up to be in the classroom having dynamic conversations. They do value your input and they value what you know. And so being involved, not necessarily dominating, of course, but being involved and asking them questions and guiding them towards the information that they need to gather, I think that is going to be that's going to be key here. So think Socratic method, right? Asking questions, guiding them towards information, challenging them on assumptions, and things like that. All right, the last are these team-based writing exercises. These are a little bit more advanced, so I won't go into huge detail here, but these do build community. They promote teamwork and leadership among students. I think you could set them up as full-blown essays. You could set them up as reflection assignments. I think these would be a good substitute instead of discussion boards if you're just not into the discussion board model. What I usually do is tell students that, you know, I'm going to put you in a group of 3 based around a similar subject. Y'all need to work together to write me a coherent essay. You can do that via text. You can do it via Google Hangout or Zoom. You can do it with phone calls. You do not have to meet in person to do this, but you do have to practice good communication. And there is an accountability model that I have them follow. I don't just throw them in and say, figure out how to work together. There's a contract that I make them write with each other. There's a template that they have to follow. Then they write the essay, and then they submit evaluations of themselves and of their classmates. Again, happy to share all of those documents with anybody who wants to see them. If you're thinking about taking something like that on. Students, when they first see the assignment, hate the idea. But I very rarely had students come out of that assignment feeling like they didn't learn a great deal about working together, that they didn't learn something about another student's writing style that they could incorporate into their own practice. Overall, I was very hesitant to implement a project like this, but overall I've been really pleased with it. And the students, they don't want to do it for fun, but in the end, but they do come out appreciating what they learn from a project like that. So again, happy to share any documentation that y'all want to see. All right, so I heard somebody at the beginning talking about senior thesis projects and how we're going to do those in these uncertain times. I'm going to talk mostly about, I'm going to try and gear this towards people at 2-year schools and 4-year schools so that we can think about sophomore thesis and capstone projects and senior thesis and capstone projects. I have to admit, I am not, I'm a humanities person. My area of training was English, and so I'm not super aware of what we can do with science labs and more hands-on activities, but it does look like we have unlimited time in this discussion, and so as we make our way through the rest of the presentation, when there's time for Q&A at the end, those of you who are thinking about senior thesis and capstone projects that have to do with lab time and lab work, please stick around and let's have a conversation specifically about that, and then open up to other Q&A as well. So specifically, we want to focus on how we can support students. You have probably probably have a system where you have directors working with students. I'd encourage all thesis and capstone directors to continue meeting with their students. Send them reminders so that those students don't end up on the back burner, especially if you are a dean or a director. I have made a Google group in my Gmail account specifically for my capstone directors for this semester, so that every couple of days I can send them an email saying, hey, do you need anything from me? Have you heard from your student? Do I need to reach out to your student? Not something I would ever do with my capstone students. They are supposed to be responsible enough to handle the requirements of this project, but this is, again, these are not normal times. And so offering support where possible, I think, is going to be really important. You want to reach out to your library, see if they can provide you with a list of resources that have been moved online, right? There might be ebooks that they are pushing students towards. There might be databases that they've secured that they don't usually have access to. There may be course reserves that they've put online. They may be able to our library is using their desk schedule for the chat window that's on our library homepage. So rather than being at the desk, they're just working those hours in front of a chat window in their home, answering questions and calling students when necessary from a Google Voice number. So I'd see what resources they have available and then maybe send all of that information out to your capstone and thesis students in a single email so that they kind of have it all in one place. The tutoring and writing centers, keep your non-native English speakers in mind here. If you're we might think of, these are seniors or these are sophomores. They're pretty advanced in relation to the rest of our school. They're writing a senior thesis or a sophomore capstone, and they probably don't need tutoring, right? But, our non-native English speakers do. Our students who are kind of obsessive about grammar and mechanics and feel very overwhelmed with formatting. I mean, they use tutoring for a lot of different purposes. So maybe talk with your tutoring center or your writing center and see what they're providing online. They may also have, you may have institutional memberships with Smart Thinking or tutor.com that you could kind of remind your students about that, this might be a resource that they would never normally use. But again, these are not normal times. So, and then I'd also encourage you to think about whether you can arrange like small thesis groups for students so that they feel less isolated, right? If they're in their thesis semester or their capstone semester, it's unlikely that maybe they don't have another honors course this semester. And so, moving everything online, not having access to the physical library, they might feel like they're even more isolated than they normally are. And so if you could arrange small groups and host those in some way, maybe chat groups, maybe just kind of get students in touch with each other who have similar topics, maybe not make this a requirement, but give them the opportunity to see, these are other people who are going through exactly what you're going through. Maybe you can help each other. That might go a long way in helping students feel supported. Okay, when it comes to our presentations and defenses that we have to do at the end of the semester, my school is in this weird limbo stage where we're saying, we're going to be back on March 30th. And so we'll see if that happens. But a lot of schools are already saying, we've moved online for the rest of the semester. And I'd think about, if you're looking at being online for the rest of the semester, how do you handle these presentations and defenses? I've just got a bunch of questions on this slide in hopes of guiding us towards some answers here. So think about what you're trying to accomplish in a presentation or in a defense. Are you trying to put students physically in front of other people, or are you just trying to have them think on the spot with a question that they weren't anticipating? If that's the case, could we accomplish that online? Could you do a thesis defense using Zoom or Skype or WebEx, just like we're doing right now? Can you require a small audience for every single student? If they're just giving a presentation, if it's not really a defense, if you just want them presenting in front of a group, can you really require that they be in front of a small audience right now? You keep in mind that a student might be quarantined or self-quarantined and maybe not showing a lot of symptoms and able to complete their semester, but maybe, carrying the virus or able to spread that to other people. And do you want to require that they be in a group of people? I'd keep in mind that honors students tend to be in honors because they want to impress. And so I think we might want to keep in mind that students might make some pretty poor decisions at this moment if we require things like that. So maybe just want to keep that in the back of our heads. And if you could do virtual audiences, I would encourage you to think about that. And then will the standard kind of oral presentation with a presentation tool suffice here, right? So if you're thinking about them presenting with just kind Google Slides or PowerPoint up on a screen where they can walk through a presentation and use the screen as a tool. Can that suffice? And if it will, then chances are doing what I'm doing here with, if y'all didn't minimize the video or the images of all the people who are signed into this meeting, you can still see me up in that corner of the screen. Would that suffice for a capstone or thesis presentation? And then if you tend to do things like poster presentations for a thesis or a capstone, we might think about how you could emulate the interactive nature of a poster presentation. So, off the top of my head, I'm thinking like a webcam with the student's poster next to them if they've already got it printed. And you might want to just kind of keep in the back of your head that your campus's print shop is probably closing, that Staples and Office Depot are probably closing. Any other kind of office supply or printing services that are near you might close. And so can you require a poster presentation if that's something that you generally do? Again, we want to think about what those core parts of honors are and how we accomplish those core parts, right? What are the student learning outcomes that we're trying to accomplish here? We don't have to do it the way that we've always done it, right? These are not normal times. We want to be adaptable and we want to do what's in the best interest of the student, both in this moment and for their long-term development. And that can be a hard thing to balance. So the last thing that I want to talk about before we go on to Q&A, we are going through this moment of social distancing. It's going to be important, I think, to keep our students' mental health in mind. We do tend to have very high achieving students who are unlikely to ask for help sometimes, who are likely already very stressed with it being the middle of the semester and everything changes and they're having to take classes online, which in a lot of cases is not the method of instruction that they signed up for. And some are going to be fairly isolated in ways that they're not used to. So I would keep that in mind. We do want students to accomplish big things and we do want to hold them to a high standard, but we also want to keep in mind that mental health is a real concern, not just for our students, but for all students, and that privilege is a real thing and something that we want to be able to examine as we go through this moment. So as we go through this, check on your students, create some opportunities for connection wherever you can. And like I was saying, don't assume that they'll ask for help on their own, right? What I've been telling my honors faculty here is to keep in mind what imposter syndrome felt like when we were all in grad school or when we first started our jobs. Our students feel that right now. I'd be willing to bet. And so reach out and see what you can do to support them, not just as students, but as people. And then privilege is a thing that we're going to have a lot of opportunity to reflect on in the coming weeks. So we'll likely have students who struggle to find consistent access to technology and consistent access to the internet. Work with them. Be aware that students are not, in this case, it is totally possible that a student is just not wanting to do the work. Personally, I would rather assume that my students want to do well and are struggling with access and be wrong than assume that students don't care and aren't trying and be wrong, right? So the consequences of being wrong in those two situations, I think are drastically different. If I assume that all students want to do the work and they want to perform well and they're having problems with access, and I'm wrong, then I've been taken for a ride, right? And maybe that hurts my pride. But I would much prefer that to assuming that a student is lazy or doesn't care or isn't trying, only to find out that, their brothers and sisters are at home and not in school, and so they don't have access to breakfast or lunch, and the whole family is struggling to eat. Or, mom waited tables and doesn't have work right now because restaurants are closing, and I just didn't know that. And so they're all kind of, you know, my students having to find ways to make money to keep the family going. Or, you know, they're just kind of isolated, and maybe they've struggled with anxiety and depression before, and it's just really causing them a problem right now. And, you know, the consequences for me being wrong in that situation could be pretty damaging for my student. And I would rather avoid that if I can. So all of that to say, I think this is just an opportunity to reflect on the privileges from which we benefit, and, you know, wherever possible, explore some ways to address this in the ways that you communicate with your students, with the class discussions that you build, and with the assignments that you put together in these weird times. So with that, I'm opening it up to Q&A. Let's see, how do I want to do this? I can open it up to Q&A. If any of y'all want to unmute your microphone and ask questions, I think probably a good thing to do would be to focus on thesis projects that require labs for the time being, if anybody has any advice there. And if not, then we can just move on to other Q&A that we've got. All right, I'm not hearing any questions. If anybody has questions and you're trying to ask them, if you want to unmute your microphone, you can contribute that way. If not, I can go to the chat and see if I can find stuff that's coming up here at the end.
Hi, this is Nancy. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, so I had typed in a question, and you had sort of, I'm a social scientist as well, but about 60% of our students are science students, natural science, and many of them work in labs. I was wondering if anybody out there does have some thoughts. We have closed our labs. We're in New Jersey. We've closed our labs, and all of our classes have gone remote. So just any thoughts about how to help students finish their thesis, their research thesis projects? What are other people doing, so that I can make some suggestions to the faculty members would be helpful.
All right, any ideas from anybody in the group?
This is Annette Schwabe at Florida State University. I think we've actually not gotten direction from the graduate school. We were going to follow their policies for what they were going to do with lab work based on dissertations. But we talked about seeing whether the faculty member could actually do some of the lab work on behalf of the student, if they're able to get on campus and do that, and then let the student interpret the results and do the rest of the work. It's not an ideal circumstance, but it might be better than having them do an alternative project like a meta-analysis or something else in the last minute.
Okay.
And one thing to explore with your administration, our school has gotten clearance to keep one of our math labs open with the understanding that we're going to have like a computer station, and then these two computer stations closed, and then this computer station is open, so that we can keep 6 to 8 feet distance between our students and document that we are following healthy protocol. Anybody with symptoms is encouraged not to come in, and they are, you know, we do have the ability to turn people away if, you know, they're seeming, I don't know, symptomatic. But you might be able to explore with your administration, if we have students come into the lab to do their work, and there's just that student or 2 students, 3 students, and a faculty member, we're keeping numbers down, we're not in groups of 10 or more. Does that fit with the recommendations of the chancellor or governing body, or whoever's or your governor, whoever's making these decisions in your state or your college or university? So that might be something to explore with your administration as well. Other questions about thesis work or lab work?
I was wondering, this is Michelle Height from Spelman, and I had originally asked this question because one of my colleagues was asking about her student. And I'm wondering how, because like you, I'm in the humanities, Victoria.
Yes.
And so I don't know how reasonable it is to ask the student to finish from where they are. Like, we are at midterm. So if the results weren't in, I mean, is it reasonable to say that they might have to just speculate from where they left off and have the faculty member at least acknowledge that they had done this research and then have them just finish out the project from where they are? Would that be reasonable?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'd ask us to think about what we're trying to accomplish here. Are we trying, you know, in my case, I feel pretty lucky here in that all of our capstone students none of our capstone students this semester are doing actual lab work, which I was disappointed about at the beginning of the semester, but now it seems kind of like a little bit of grace. And I can ask myself, what am I trying to accomplish with these students? Am I trying to get them to do am I trying to get them to do a specific project, right? Every paper has to be 12 to 15 pages. Every paper has to have a certain amount of research. Or am I trying to get them to do deep self-directed undergraduate research?
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to get them to do is deep self-directed undergraduate research. Maybe I can lighten up on some of the things that I originally planned. And be really transparent with the students about why I'm lightening up on that, right? Y'all are under a lot of stress. These are not normal times. I would never do this, except in the case of a global pandemic, right?
Right.
So, you know, if your students have made it halfway and there's a way to take what they've gotten here and draw conclusions or analysis from what they've got, maybe that's not such a bad thing if that still accomplishes those learning outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me.
I
Yeah.
think so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One thought for science might be to have them design or articulate the designs for the next experiments that they should have done or they might have done had they had the equipment.
That's a good idea.
Design for the next project they would have done?
Well, or the continuation of the project that they're in.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like really articulate specifically. That's a hard thing to do, actually, for a student to develop procedure in an experiment.
Okay.
I mean, your science person will know better whether she thinks or he thinks that's an appropriate direction, but it's a thought. Because it is hard for them to develop procedures.
Okay.
And having to articulate what that process would be might accomplish some of the things that we want to accomplish, given the perfect world. All right, any other questions or thoughts about thesis or capstone projects? I'm trying to go through the chat and see if there's anything that we can make sure.
One other thing is, what about also encouraging students to find data sources that are already available? I mean, I know it's not kind of own data gathering, but also, I mean, but they could go to Shift to see what data are already out there and then do their analysis with existing data. A way we can support that.
Yeah, I think for some projects that might be a really great alternative. And again, we want to keep in mind, you know, all the perfect things that we would do if we weren't in a moment of crisis. You know, those are maybe things that we can give to the next group of students. And as unfortunate as we think that is for these students, they didn't ask to be in classes during this moment. Our seniors, or if you're at a 2-year school, our sophomores who are about to graduate and leave us, this is not what they envisioned their senior year to look like. And so we want to keep in mind all of that ideal stuff. So that's all well and good, right? What can we do now to get the learning objectives across? So Marigold, I think that's probably that would be a good alternative. All right, so if there are other questions about the thesis or capstone, please throw them out. But we can transition into other questions that y'all have, things that you were hoping this presentation would address but didn't, maybe.
I was reading through the group chat, and it sounds like a lot of people would like your resources on contract agreements or discussions. That's the only thing I've picked up from that, but I was one of those people. So
great. Well, so I think that the contract and the evaluations, those have to do with team essays or team reflections that you're having them do. I think those are in that online resource toolkit. I'll double check and see, but that's something that NCHC is making available along with this recording. But if they're not there, I'll send them to Mary Beth to be put into that toolkit. I can't take credit for building all of that. That's stuff that I've gathered from different high impact practice conferences and honors conferences over the years. But I'm pretty pleased with where we are with that assignment. It's one that I've used in my honors early American lit and one that I use in our honors leadership class online. And it stresses, as a team, you show leadership not by steamrolling, but by motivating the team to come together. And it also addresses why teamwork often fails, right? It's because trust isn't built. It's because clear communication channels aren't laid out. And it encourages them to kind of work through all those common problems up front. So I'm pretty pleased with where it is right now. But again, I'll get that on that honors online toolkit and try to make sure that those are Word documents so y'all can adjust as you need. Okay.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so 2 questions. One is, is it okay if we share this? The information on this video has been really helpful. I think it's helpful to our entire honors community, but I also think it might be helpful to people who are not teaching honors as well. Are you okay with us sharing this widely? Is that?
I am, yeah.
Okay. And then my other question is, I really liked the piece where you were talking about community and how do we maintain community, because most of us have sort of a living learning community, or at least have some sort of community, or we try to accomplish that. Are there suggestions people in the group might have also about how they're doing that? I mean, I thought I'm trying to find a way to do sort of open office hours. People can just sort of contact in, but I was just wondering what ideas people have online to create, what other resources they're using, whether it's their campus platforms or other third-party platforms to create community.
I'm a big fan of those group chats, and I saw somebody in the question and answer chat here talking about Discord. That was one that I didn't list. So I'm a big fan of those. I think they work pretty well. But other ideas?
I do have an idea. This is Alana Rosenberg in California. I have a requirement that my students, all of the students in the honors program, meet with me for 15 minutes in the semester, because I don't teach, and this is the only way that I can get to them. And I am now making that mandatory, that it has to be by email, chat, something, because I think we do have a lot of stranded students, and I'm very worried about access. I'd also like to know whether it's okay with you if there's a recording of this that I could put on the Honors Transfer Council of California website. I see a few of my colleagues here, but we have 60 colleges, especially up in the Bay Area right now, who are desperately scrambling, and I don't think they had time to listen to this, but would love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the plan is to make the video available. NCHC is going to make that available. So again, happy for y'all to share that however you need.
I've been trying to work with my students, being at a college and not a university, of emphasizing the work that they need to do beyond the classroom, of their own authority to build an intellectual life. And so one of the things that I was interested in doing during this time was continuing those exploring intellectual community forums. So like maybe on a Thursday, I was going to email them about watching a Netflix film. In this case, it's one called Atlantics, which is about immigration in Senegal. And then meeting in, via Zoom to have a chat about it. so that we could do that. Like, we could expect to have these intellectual exchanges that'll occur like over a Netflix film. I was going to ask some of them to participate in discussing that film or leading a discussion, people who I know do work on film. Then I was going to try to end each of those forums asking for the next recommendation. Perhaps doing that over music and other cultural artifacts that we know could be accessible. They know I don't watch popular films, so I was going to tell them, okay, you get to pick one and I'll watch it. I've had some of them recommend, like Megan Thee Stallion has a new CD out, so I listened to that in order to provide them with funny commentary about how I thought about it. So, I mean, I've been trying to think about the fact that for students, oftentimes academic resources seem like they come from another planet, but they do seem to have access to popular resources. So, you know, I've said to them things like, well, you're worried about what the dance program can do now that we're virtual, but I see a TikTok from you every other day, right? So clearly you're dancing. So I've been thinking about, you know, trying to have a consistent way of meeting with students, just to extend community in that way so that they can expect some kind of outreach.
Yeah,
You
that's a wonderful idea. I think that's one of my favorite things that our program does is like movie nights or game nights, or you know, the social stuff where they do end up talking about the things that they're learning in their classes, and it ends up being intellectual against their, you know, their intention.
Right.
But I love that idea. And, you know, our student life office is trying to figure out how to get our clubs on campus to still do Zoom meetings and continue the projects that they had planned. Our honor student council is just devastated because they had this big, like, feminine hygiene products drive that they were doing to like make these available for free on campus in protest of the pink tax. And they're just devastated that they did all this work, and now they're all going to graduate and not be able to see the benefit of it. So figuring out ways for them to continue these projects and engage with each other like that, I think that's really important. And once we get our classes all figured out and we're kind of finding our new normal in this remote education world, that part is going to be so important.
Thank you for those. Those are great suggestions. As you were talking, I was sort of thinking, is there some like online gaming, you know, that's free for everybody, like bowling or something that, you know, you could do a virtual sort of game night also, where really fun idea, you know, just sort of like you said, just something both intellectual but also just sort of community building. So those lots of great suggestions. Thank you.
Yeah, there's what's it called? There's an app you can download called Space Team, but I think you have to. That's a bad example. Don't worry. That you have to be like, physically with each other to play that game. Never mind. But games that they could play remotely as an honors group, you know, might break some of the tension that we're living through right now. All right. Other questions from the group or suggestions for moving things online or building community?
I'm Kelsey Ben. I'm from Western Colorado University, and I sent this on the chat. I was wondering about, so we're on spring break this week, and then I'm wondering when we reconvene remotely, I'm concerned about how do we effectively convene together? I'm just concerned about the people who may just drop off the face of the earth, right, with connectivity issues, so on. What's an effective way to just kind of bring everyone together to start this off well?
Yeah. Are you thinking like at a program level or at a class level?
On a platform level, like, well, so I'm using Blackboard.
Yeah. Yeah, there are probably several ways to go. From where I'm sitting, I've sent a couple emails out to all of the students in the program, letting them know First of all, this is what's going to happen. Don't worry. You've got it. I believe in you. You're going to be fine. Right. And then a follow-up. Hey, I haven't heard from a lot of people. Do everybody, y'all feel okay? Like, anybody having like major panic attacks over this? What can I do to help? And then today started sending out emails saying, please keep in mind that it would be very easy to get each other all whipped up about this. Let's all try to stay calm. If you have questions, please go to your instructor and ask, right? Don't feel like that's a sign of weakness. Don't feel like you're bothering anybody. Ask for help, and your professor can give you good answers. If they can't, I will try to, right? So get in touch with me and I will try to help you out. But try to avoid that, getting into a group chat with other students who are frustrated and just, and then another thing that went wrong and I can't believe that this happened and you're not going to believe what this person had me do. So I've been trying to kind of minimize that and be like, let's try to be good leaders here. Let's be positive voices of reason as much as possible. Keep each other calm. Let me know when you're having a stress moment and I can try to help you out. So that kind of process I think is useful. And then when classes start back up, I think you can kind of go to, if you've got a full honors group on your platform, maybe that's regular messages reminding them, we're not doing this to torture you. We're doing this for your own health and safety. We're here for you. We want to see you succeed. If we didn't care about you succeeding, we would have just canceled the semester and said everybody gets an incomplete or whatever until we're able to come back after this pandemic passes. But we believe in you and we care about you. That kind of language I think goes a long way. And then, I'm having to make peace with the fact that I'm just not going to reach every single person in the same way, right? And so an email won't reach everybody. A synchronous meeting won't reach everybody. A video that I post won't necessarily reach everybody. The chat groups that we have in GroupMe won't necessarily reach everybody. But if it matters enough to me to kind of get those options out there and be consistent with my message, then they'll all get it in some way. And if not, then they'll hear it from other students and know that those resources are there. So I don't know. That's where I sit right now. If there's anybody else in the group who has an idea about how to convene everybody here as we come back after spring break or an extended spring break, maybe on your LMS platform, feel free to throw those examples out here for us.
I plan to, what you were saying about, at first, I think I was thinking about doing this synchronously because of the schedule, right? My class meets at 9:25 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But then I decided that I'm not going to treat this like a physical class that moved online. I think I'm going to redesign the class for the times and just sort of use it as an opportunity to see what I might be able to do in terms of, meeting as many people and their needs as possible. So my plan is to use the LMS to reinforce, what my sort of new redesign is. But I'm also going to build out a WordPress site because it's free. You don't have to log in. It's sort of, I know that it'll adjust easily, in terms of the various platforms that people might be working on. And so like my LMS will only be to do things that I need to do privately, like grade.
Yeah.
But I'm also going to, I think, revamp the class. Again, I think some of the students, they buy the books as you need them. So I don't really want to count on that. So I think I want to rebuild, but also, just sort of thinking about the class more as a portfolio, as opposed to papers that I had planned. So, maybe going to a pass-fail option that has an A for this, a B for this, and a C for this, but it's going to require that you do these various kinds of things. that I think the LMS will be used to communicate that, hey, on the first day back from break, I'm going to explain how that's going to work, you know, be there so you can see that. So that's sort of like my hook. But primarily I'm thinking I'm going to work outside of the LMS just because I know that we're dealing with strained resources, colleagues who don't really know how to do things online. I think it'll be easier that way.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it's helpful for me, at least, to think about online as being just a physical space. It's not. It's different. And so I really want to exploit that difference for myself to see what I can do with it.
Yeah. I think that'll be really valuable. And again, you know, one thing that I tell students and honors faculty often is that, you know, honors is about taking risks. It's about
Yeah.
trying something new and different and weird and telling our students, like, come with me on this journey and we'll figure it out, you know. And, you know, I hate to be too kind of rose-colored glasses about it, but this is an opportunity to try something that you might not have tried otherwise. And it will be a headache probably, and it'll be frustrating, I'm sure. But I think that there is reason to think that if we're creative and intentional, we might come up with some assignments or processes or community building intentions that we didn't have before.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Carolyn.
Hi.
I have an unusual situation. I'm wondering if any of you have thought about the ramifications of changing grading. I am teaching a service learning course. My students are connected to a nonprofit organization. About 2/3 of the class have already done some of their required interaction at the agency. The others have not yet been. There's probably 30% of the course grade that is related to their out-of-class experience.
Yeah.
We're not going to be able to do it. The organization has also closed.
Yeah.
It is connected. It involves children, so the school systems are closed. It's impossible. They can't do a reflection on something they haven't done.
Right.
I'm going to have to change the structure of grading, or else either adding other things in to replace that, or prorate what I have so that basically it blossoms the weighting of the things they have already done or will do. I just wondered if any of you have had any thoughts about the alterations we would do to a syllabus grading, which is by law the legal contract
Right.
with them of what they expect at the beginning of the semester, and there is some obligation for us to meet that syllabus.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think our primary concern is going to be doing right by the student, right? So in normal circumstances, I wouldn't say it's a good idea to go changing your grading structure halfway through the semester just because you decided to do something different. But this is a different kind of thing. And most syllabi do say, you know, we reserve the right to change processes as needed. And so, you know, maybe talk with your upper administration and see if they have an objection to this. My inclination, and if I had a faculty member come to me as dean and say, I want to do this, I would say, this sounds great, go for it. I'd figure out a way to chat with the students and tell them what's going on, right? Whether it's an email or a video or something like that, and say, we are up against very weird circumstances here, and I physically cannot require that you go and do this service learning project. So I'm going to shift the project into a research assignment or something like that. Or you might just say, this 30% of the grade, I'm going to have to disperse out for the rest of the semester. And I've done it in a way that I think will be most advantageous to you. And then maybe say, you know, I'm going to give you 2 or 3 days, maybe a week, to contact me if you have serious objections to what I'm proposing. If I don't hear from anyone, I'm going to put up a revised syllabus and submit it to the school. That way the students do have a way to voice some concern about an alternate assignment or grading alteration that you've come up with. If there's something that will negatively impact you, they have some voice in letting you, or sorry, that will negatively impact them, they have some voice in telling you before you just go ahead and make that change. But then you've also got some documentation that you presented the idea to them, you kind of worked with them collaboratively and cooperatively to come up with something that would serve the class well in this very weird moment. Again, I'd clear it with administration, but I don't know, if one of my faculty members came to me with that idea as dean, I would say that sounds great. Just make sure that you update the syllabus online so that they have access to how they're being graded now.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, any other questions or suggestions or advice? All right, y'all, this has been really fun. I've been in continuity plan meetings for the last week and a half, and I finally get to talk about some honor stuff. And I'm glad you were all able to join. I'm glad we were able to record this so that we can make it available to other people. I did see in the chat that there were some questions about my email address. If any of the people who are still signed on want my email address really quickly, I'll go ahead and give it to you. For those of you who are watching this in a video, if you've made it the full, hour and 15 minutes, congratulations, here's my email address. But that's V as in Victoria, Bryan, B-R-Y-A-N, at Cleveland State CC, as in community college, .edu. So again, that's V as in Victoria, B-R-Y-A-N, at Cleveland State CC .edu. All right, like I said, I had a really good time. Best of luck to y'all. Check in on each other and with your students. Do what you can to build community from afar during this weird time. And if there's anything that I can do to help you out, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.